My name is Tom Moran from the Intelligent Systems Laboratory of Xerox PARC. In this videotape, we'd like to show you a system that we've been developing to explore how we can aid users in the authoring process. By authoring, we mean not just the processes involved in crafting words and sentences and pictures for a communication or a document, but also, and from our point of view more important and more crucial, the processes that precede that of articulating and structuring the ideas to be presented. Modern text editing systems, for the most part, are very good for helping us craft words and sentences. That is, once we reach the stage of having some text to work with. Before we reach that point, when we're at the stage of trying to organize some ideas to present, it's usually easier to just jot notes on paper. It's much less constraining than a text editing system. Of course, notes on paper have their disadvantages too, especially when we try to rearrange or modify them. We can easily end up with a tangled mess that's not very usable. Many people find it useful to take notes on small note cards. A note card, if you think about it, is actually a pretty ideal size. It's just about the right size to jot down a single idea, which gives us a physical idea-sized unit to deal with, to manipulate. Taking a note on a note card is very easy and informal. But more important, when I take a note on an individual note card, I don't have to make any initial commitment to how that note relates to other notes. It's free to move around. When I get a collection of notes, I can group them together into piles or put them into file boxes. And I can take notes and spread them out on a table and manipulate them and browse them and discover new relationships among the ideas. All in all, this metaphor of note cards was very attractive to us as an initial metaphor to build an authoring environment. So what we've done is constructed an experimental authoring environment and built it in the Interlisp-D programming environment. The system is called Notecards. The Notecard system basically gives us electronic note cards on the screen. It allows the user to create and to manipulate and to file electronic note cards. One advantage we have in the electronic medium is that we can give the user facilities to explicitly link note cards, and therefore the ability to build up complex structures relating all the ideas. So these facilities for creating and structuring notes, along with facilities that we'd like to provide for browsing notes on the screen and for sophisticated text editing, gives us the beginnings of providing an environment that can take us through the whole authoring process, from idea creation to idea structuring to the final crafting of the final textual product. So let's take a look at what the note card system looks like, which will be demonstrated by Frank Halasz.
I'd like to demonstrate note cards by giving you a retrospective overview of the process of authoring a single document. This authoring process was originally carried out by Ken Allen, a graduate student in German history at Stanford University. Ken was the test pilot for note cards during its first 6 months of development. He used the system to research, structure, and eventually write a paper on the NATO missiles crisis in Western Europe. In this demonstration, I will use Ken's NATO missiles database to show you some of the elements of the authoring process, including note-taking, idea structuring, outlining, and producing the final product. But before beginning on the authoring process, I'd like to show you some of the basic concepts in the note card system. The basic object in this system is an electronic note card, which contains a small piece of text or graphics. The note cards can then be linked together to form an arbitrary network of related note cards. Here on the screen we see a single note card from our NATO missiles note file. Contains a single sentence about Soviets' belief on missile ranges, NATO missile ranges. Within the note card we see a link to another note card in the note file. If we point to that link, the system will retrieve from the note file the related note card, which you see is another small piece of text, itself containing a link to a third note card, Pershing capabilities. If we point to that link within the note card, we retrieve the third note card, Pershing capabilities, which again is some set of text about the Pershing missile capabilities. So we see that we have 3 note cards linked together in the network. Now the system can draw a map, a node and link map of the relations between these note cards, which are actually invisible on the screen. That map is called a browser, and here we see a browser of the relation between these note cards. Here, USSR Pershing range claim, which is this note card, is connected to Soviet first strike claim, which is this note card, which in turn is connected to Pershing capabilities, which is this note card here. Interestingly, the browser shows us that Pershing capabilities itself is connected to two further note cards, accuracy of Pershing 2 and another note card which is off the screen on this particular browser. So, in fact, if we scroll Pershing a little bit, we'll see that Pershing does contain two further links to note cards, guidance of Pershing 2 and accuracy of Pershing 2, just as described in this browser. Well, a network of heavily interconnected note cards is very difficult to navigate around. So we've created a context mechanism within note cards which we call file boxes. Now this is the top-level topic file box in our NATO missiles database. And you see the file box contains two things. It contains a list of other file boxes, which in some sense are subdivisions of the topic of NATO missiles. And it contains a set of note cards relevant to the topic of NATO missiles. If we point to the first file box, first sub-file box of our top-level file box, characteristics of TNF missiles, we see that characteristics of TNF missiles is itself a file box which contains three other file boxes which subdivide the topic of characteristics of TNF missiles into US TNF missiles, Soviet TNF missiles, and third country missiles. If we point to US TNF missiles, we get a further subdivision of US TNF missiles into Pershing 2 characteristics and GLCM characteristics. If we point to Pershing 2 characteristics, we see that Pershing 2 characteristics is no longer further subdivided, but simply contains a series of note cards. Now when we bring one of these note cards out of the note file, we see that it's simply a piece of text that's connected into the network of note cards by this link here to another note card. So what the context mechanism does, what the file box mechanism does, is allow you to find your way to some particular piece of the network about a particular sub-topic. And then you can drop into the network of note cards and follow the relations between the information in the various note cards. Okay, let me shift focus a little bit here and pretend that I'm Ken Allen using this database to write a paper on the NATO missile crisis in Western Europe. Now, in order to do this, let me first clean off my screen slightly. In order to do this, I would start my day by going to the top-level note cards menu and choosing the command show box, which brings up the top-level file box in the system. Now, within the top-level file box, I have a sub-box called bibliography. Now, the bibliography simply contains pointers to all of the articles I'm taking notes on while writing this paper on the NATO missile crisis. In particular, this Smith Deployment Shakes Politics is the article which I'm currently working on. I point to it and retrieve it from the database, and it turns out to be an article from Science by Jeffrey Smith. And I've been reading along and have come to this paragraph, which I'm now scrolling into view. The paragraph reads, "The Soviets complain and the Europeans widely believe that the Pershing II is intended primarily as a first strike weapon by the United States." Well, that's a very interesting claim, and I'd like to take a note on it. So in order to take a note, I go up to the main note cards menu and choose Create, which creates a blank text card. Now at this point, I could paraphrase the claim in that paragraph by typing in the Soviets claim and so on. But in this case, I choose not to do that and simply would like to copy the paragraph from the original article into my note card. I'll do that using the standard text edit copy facility, and it copies the text from the document into the note card. Let me then reshape the note card so that I can see more of the text. And consider the first sentence. The Soviets complain and the Europeans widely believe that Pershing II is intended primarily as a first strike weapon by the United States. Well, I remember that I earlier took a note that directly contradicts this claim. What I could do was go to my topic hierarchy and search through that topic hierarchy looking for the file box that contains information that is somehow related to first strike capabilities. Well, that's one way I could do it. In this case, I think I'll choose to use another way of accessing the information, which is this index file box which I've created, which actually Ken has created. Now, if I point to the index file box, I see that it is, in fact, simply a file box that contains a set of other file boxes divided by topic area, so that we see that there's a file box which points to cards about Yuri Andropov, a file box that points to cards about cruise missiles, and so on. As I look through my topics in the index, I see that the topic I'm interested in is flexible response. I point to flexible response, and I see that in this system I have categorized 4 note cards under the topic of flexible response. And in fact, I now remember that missile gap question is the card that contradicts the information in the note that I just took. So I see that missile gap question is a piece of text about a statement made by Secretary of Defense Harold Brown, which claims that in fact the Pershing II is not a first strike weapon. So what I want to do is go back to my original note and say that there is a related note card in this system that directly contradicts the information in this note I just took. To do so, I simply ask the system to insert a link. It asks me what is the type of this link. All links in the system have a type which carries the meaning or the semantics of that link. Once I've chosen the type, oh, by the way, I chose the type contradiction because this is contradictory information. Once I've chosen the type, it asks me what card I would like to point to, and my choice is either a new card or an existing card in the system. In this case, I'd like to choose an existing card, which is missile gap question, so I simply point to missile gap question. It then inserts a link to missile gap question within my note card. Now the link is displayed simply as an icon for a note card, which I would like to expand into to include the title of the note card. So what you see here is that there's a link between my new note card and missile gap question. In fact, if I put missile gap question away, I can point to missile gap question within my new note card and it will simply retrieve it from the database. So there is now a link between these 2 note cards. So now I've connected my new note card into the network of note cards in my database. My next goal is to file this note card away into the topic hierarchy in the appropriate place. But before I do that, I have to give my note card a title, since all note cards are required to have titles. So let me assign it a title. I will call it First Strike Claim by Soviets, describing the information in the card. Next thing I want to do is assign a source of information for this card. This isn't required, but it's generally a good idea to specify the source of information for each card. So I ask the system to allow me to designate a source, and I say this card from which I took the note is the source of the information in this new note card. So I point to it and say done, and now this card has attached to it information that Smith Deployment Shakes Politics is the source of First Strike Claim by Soviets. Now I'm ready to file this in my topic hierarchy somewhere. What I have to do is pull up information about my topic hierarchy. And Ken has created a browser that describes his topic hierarchy. And see here, what we see here is simply a node and link diagram, just like the browser I showed you before, but in this case it shows only the sub-box relation. So there's a file box called topics, whose sub-box is TNF doctrine, which in turn contains 2 file boxes, NATO TNF doctrine and Soviet TNF doctrine. Well, in fact, Soviet TNF doctrine is a file box that's likely to a place I want to keep my new note card. So let me retrieve it from the database and take a look at it. And in fact, if I look through the note cards already stored there, I see that there is a lot of information about Soviet beliefs. And so that is, in fact, where I'd like to file my note card. Looking over the topic hierarchy, I also see that no first use proposal is likely to be a place I'd like to file this note card as well, so let me file it there. So I asked the system to allow me to file this note card. The first place I'd like to file it is in Soviet TNF doctrine, and the second place I'd like to file it is in no first use proposal. Then I say I'm done choosing places to file it, and you see that the system has filed this note card under Soviet TNF doctrine. It has also, incidentally, gone into the note file and retrieved no first use proposal and filed the card in there. You see that now if I close and save this note card in the database, I can retrieve it from the Soviet TNF doctrine file box. Okay, so now my note card is not only linked into the note file network, but it is also filed into my topic hierarchy within this note file. Let me continue reading this note file, and I notice the last sentence is also very interesting. It reads, significantly, the Soviets believe, or at least claim to believe, that the Pershing II is capable of reaching key military and political targets in the vicinity of Moscow, 2,500 kilometers away. Well, that's a very important claim, and I know that somewhere in my system I have stored a map that shows the ranges of all the NATO missiles in Western Europe. Now I'd like to retrieve that map in order to be able to evaluate this claim by the Soviets. Now, one thing I could do was to look through my topic hierarchy again, trying to find where I filed that map, but I simply forgotten where I filed it. So I'll use another mechanism in the system, the search mechanism, in order to locate my map. I go up to the main menu and choose Create, and this time I ask the system to create a search card, that is, a card that contains the results of a search of the database. It asks me what string I'm interested in searching for, and I will choose map. And it searches through the titles of all the cards, looking for cards with map in the title. This is simply a place marker search mechanism for a much more sophisticated search mechanism we hope to eventually enter into the system. Well, the result of the search is 2 note cards, and let me choose the second one because I remember that that is the map that I'm looking for in particular. And the system will retrieve a note card, but this time it's not a text note card but a sketch note card. That is, it's based on a full sketch editor rather than a text editor. And the sketch editor includes the capability of drawing a map of any section of the world. In this case, Ken chose to draw a map of Western Europe and a little bit of Asia. On top of that map, he sketched arcs and lines representing the ranges of the various missiles placed in Western Europe. In addition, at each point where there are missile bases, Ken placed pointers to note cards relevant to those locations on the map. So if I point to the note card link near in Britain, I'll see that the system will retrieve the note card called GLCM basing in the UK, which contains information about the 160 GLCMs in Britain. Similarly, if I go here near Italy and point to the note card link at that point, the system retrieves a card that's that contains information about the cruise missiles based in Sicily. So we see that we can lay out note cards in a spatial configuration within a sketch card. Now, what I'm really interested in this card is the fact that there are missiles that can reach Moscow, just as the Soviets claim. So we see here that there's a missile based in the UK that can reach Moscow. Well, is this in fact the case? Is the map drawn correctly? Well, Ken included within his map a pointer or a link to the note card from which the map was drawn. This is simply a table that contains the information which he used to draw the lines on the map. And we see here, under range, which is in miles, we see that Pershing II can only reach about 1,000 miles, which is 1,500 kilometers. So it's considerably less than the 2,500 kilometers that the Soviets originally claimed Pershing II could go. However, we see that the Poseidon C-3 can reach 2,500 miles, which is considerably greater than the 2,500 miles the Soviets claimed for the Pershing II. So we see that the Soviet claim is partially correct. There are missiles which can reach Moscow. Unfortunately, they are not the Pershing II, but they're the Poseidon C-3 missiles. Well, I'm still a little doubtful of this information. Is this a reliable source? Is this information reliable? So I'd like to find out the source of this information. To do so, I can ask the system to display all the links to and from this note card containing the table. And I see that one of the links is a source link, just as I created a source link on my new note pointing to the original article from which I took that note. Ken created a pointer to the article from which he extracted this table. And we see that that article is in fact Treverton Treverton's book called Nuclear Weapons in Europe, and Ken assures us this is a very reliable source, so I'm going to believe the information in this table as being that it's correct. So what I've discovered here is that in fact the Pershing IIs cannot reach Moscow, but the Poseidon missiles can. And I want to take note of that fact in my note on the first strike claim. So I'm going to insert a note to myself that says, see Poseidon, first I have to spell it, Poseidon versus Pershing range information in my note, and then create a link to the relevant card, which is the table from. So to do so, I ask the system to insert a link. Now this is contradictory information again, so let me choose it to be a contradiction link and make it point to the table. So we see that next time I am looking at the first strike claim by Soviets card, which I've just created, I'll see that there's some contradictory information or some related information about Poseidon versus Pershing ranges, and I'll go back to the table and examine that information. So I've further connected my new note card into the network of note cards in the note file. Let me once again switch focus here and pretend that I have taken all of the notes relevant to the paper I hope to write on NATO missiles. My job then is to restructure my information in a way that will allow me to make it easy to write a paper. And in fact, that's what Ken did. When he had completed his process of taking notes from his sources, he reorganized his topic hierarchy. What you see here is Ken's original topic hierarchy, as I showed you before. When he was ready to write his paper, Ken totally reorganized his topic hierarchy. He took each file box, removed all of its sub-file boxes and note cards, and then reorganized those sub-file boxes and note cards. What you see here is Ken's restructured topic hierarchy. Let's examine just a small piece of this. Here in NATO TNF modernization plan was a file box that originally contained two sub-file boxes, origins of deployment plan and perception of the need for modernization. Each of those included one sub-file box. And interestingly, it was a lattice structure where both origins of deployment plan and perception of need for modernization eventually had U.S. response to Soviets as a sub-file box. With the goal of writing a paper in mind, Ken totally reorganized NATO TNF modernization plan. First of all, he eliminated the category origins of deployment plan and added three new categories you see here: official NATO view, HLG and TNF modernization plan, and decision to adopt GLCM. And he maintained one of the sub-file boxes, that is the perception of need for modernization. And you see that each of the new sub-file boxes has no sub-boxes of its own, so that what was originally a very narrow and deep organizational structure under TNF modernization plan became a much wider and very shallow organizational structure with the goal of using this to write a paper in mind. So once Ken had completed this reorganizational structure, he used his new topic hierarchy to form an outline of the paper he hoped to write. And what you see here is that outline that Ken created. What he did was he created a series of blank text cards which represented the major sections of his paper. So he created a blank text card for introduction, a blank text card for the background of decision, and so on, and inserted each of these into this outline, pointers to each of these into the outline you see here. Then underneath each section, he inserted pointers to the note cards that were relevant to that section. So under section 2 here, the background of the decision, he inserted a link to, for example, this card on European deployment, okay, that contains information that's relevant to the background of the decision. Okay. Once this outline was completed, he then brought up the blank section card plus each of the notes relevant to that section, and from the notes he simply created the text narrative on the paper he was writing. So here we see background of the decision, and the first paragraph is some text narrative that Ken wrote based on the notes. And after each paragraph, he inserted a pointer or a link to the note card from which he was writing that paragraph. So while this is text narrative, we can always get back from the text narrative to the original note that was taken on this, was taken from the sources. Once Ken had written each of the sections of his paper in this manner, he then simply concatenated all of the sections together to form a draft of the paper he was writing. And this was simply a text editing operation, creating a new note card from a series of other note cards. And we see here the rough draft of the paper on the NATO missile crisis that Ken wrote from his notes. It's simply a concatenation of the sections he wrote for his outline. So let me review what Ken has done using this note card system. Starting from a series of sources, which he had stored here under his bibliography file box, Ken took a series of notes. And then he structured those notes in two ways. First, he linked related note cards together using the note cards linking mechanism. And second, he filed each note card into a hierarchy of topics and subtopics, which was illustrated by this initial topic browser he was using when creating the note, when originally collecting the notes. Once the notes were finished collecting, Ken reorganized his topic hierarchy into a new topic browser, which I showed you. Once all the notes were reorganized into a new topic browser that was closer to the goal of writing a paper based on these notes, Ken created from the topic browser an outline containing the major section of the paper and all the notes relevant to each of the sections of the paper. From the outline, he simply wrote the text from the notes in each section and then concatenated the text from each of the sections into the rough draft of the paper. So the entire authoring process of the paper on the NATO missile crisis was done within the note card system, from collecting those notes to structuring those notes to creating the final outline and final document about the NATO missile crisis in Germany.